Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.com, and in this video what I want to do is just show you the many ways you could style a React app. I've done a video like this before, but I think it's time for a new one because there's been some new options since. So we'll just kind of go, right now here I have a React app. I'm just going to work out of the app component. I'm not going to worry about having all those sorts of many components for this particular video because I just want to show you about styling. So let me just show you the sort of easy out-of-the-box ways you can style right off the bat. So one, you can do inline styling. So I could literally at any point in time, I could just pass to any component, I can pass a style prop. Okay, and that style prop has to equal an object. So that's why I have to do two curly brackets, because the first curly brackets that allows us to inject values in JSX, and the second set of curly brackets is the actual object. And in this object, I can pass properties that are CSS properties. So I could be like background color and say, hey, this background color is red. And I can style, the individual elements as I want. So we can see here, we'll just see that at work. So I'm going to create a new terminal. Let's run this, npm start. And this is assuming create React app. So some of these out-of-the-box options may not be available to something other than create React app. But you see, hello world, got the red background, okay? The cool thing about this is you could, basically I would use this for things that, like, if I need to pass in props, and then I'm going to set different individual properties via props. This is a good way to do it. So that way I can say, hey, background color equals like props.background color. So that way you can change the background color depending on how you're using that instance of a component. But oftentimes you don't want to do all of your styling this way because it can get cumbersome. Okay, so let me get rid of that for a moment. Okay, or actually I'm just gonna pass an empty object, so I'll just get rid of this for now. So that way it's no longer red. Good. Okay. The other thing you can do is you can attach a CSS file. So I'm gonna create we already have this app.css file. I'm just gonna make it empty. So I'm gonna empty this out. And essentially you can attach a CSS file by just importing it. So just import, /app.css. Okay. Now the thing you have to keep in mind when you import CSS this way, even if you make a separate CSS file for each component, anytime you import a CSS like this, it is going to be a global CSS. So other things other components that might have things that be subject to the same selector is going to end up getting styled. Okay, so generally the strategy when you do this is, see how we have the top level element, which is a div for this particular component, and it has a class name of app. What you do is you style everything relative to that. So if I want to style that h1, I'd head over to my app.css and I'd say, dot app, because that's the class. Let me just double check. Yep, see class of app, and then say, hey, any h1s that are inside of that div, because it's that div has a class of app, so that makes the h1 a child of it, and then I can be like, okay, make that background color red. Okay, and then it becomes red again. So I can do that. So you can attach CSS files. Okay, so let me comment that out now. I'm pretty sure you do have built-in support for modules, or CSS modules, so let's try that out. So usually what a CSS module is if you do just want to create like a CSS file that only belongs to that component, the way you would want to do it is through a CSS module. And I do think there's built-in functionality here. So usually what you do is you do app.module.css, I think. Okay. And then what would happen here is you would just import it. Again, import. Actually, the way I think it works is you import because what's going to happen is it actually generates an object. So let me actually just do a quick search on that. Import CSS modules React. Okay, yeah, so it's button.module.css, and then when we import it, yeah, you import styles from button.module.css, and then there we go. Yeah, for the error, each class becomes a property. Got it. Okay. So what would happen is that you would import styles, or you could call it whatever you want, from /app.module.css. So what it does, it creates this object here. So this is going to be an object, and each class is a property in that object. So if I were to go to app this modules.css and say, okay, hey, I want to create a class called app, okay, and then I want to style the h1, you know, we'll just leave that, we'll just say, you know, border 3 pixels solid red, okay, and then I want to style, you know, any child of that, the h1, we want to make that background color red. Okay, what happens, it takes this file and generates an object. So basically it's going to be like styles.app. Okay, so then I would go over here to my component, and then instead of passing just a string as a class, I actually pass styles.app. The reason you're doing this is because instead the class name is actually not app. It actually dynamically generates a unique class name. So that way, you know, those styles will only apply to that particular component because only that component has that class name. Okay, so it should work. So let's take a look over here and see it works. But if I open up my dev tools to take a look at the actual class, so let's say I highlight, you know, the div. See, you get like this weird class here where see it says like app b2eeb. So that's what's generated. So that's why you have to use the object to add the class, not just type in the class name. Because what it's doing, it's creating these like hashed class names, so that way it's unique. And then other components that have other CSS modules will have different, and that way there is absolutely no overlap. You don't have to worry about, hey, any of the styles from this component bleeding into the styles of this component. You know, but again, you can get the same effect by giving each, you know, by styling relative to a class, like I did when I had just a plain CSS file. So those are two ways. So those are the built-in ways. Okay, so those require you to download no additional libraries. Okay, now right off the bat, there's two libraries I want to mention. So I'm going to npm install Sass. Okay, so that's going to be another option. And then there's also styled components. Okay, so we'll install those. Okay. Cool, so those are installed. So now that I have Sass installed, so all I have to do is install Sass, which stands for, what is it, I don't know, it's basically the fancy style sheets. I think it's what, semantic CSS or, well, whatever. Or is this something awesome style sheets? For some things that I'm forgetting the first word. I want to say semantic, but okay, basically it allows you to do programming in your CSS. You can write functions and do fancy things. Okay, so if I want to use a Sass file, I would just create a Sass file. So I create a new file, app.scss. Okay, and there I have a Sass file. So then now I could write my styles like this. I could be like, to get that same style that I wrote before, I can like be like .app. So .app is the class. Okay, and you know there we wanted to do like border 3 pixels green, solid green. But I also want to style any h1s inside of app. But instead of, I can actually nest now. And so instead of me having to do .app space h1, I can just style the h1 from inside here. Because that's what you can do with Sass, along with a bunch of other really cool stuff. So I can now say, okay, the h1 has a background color of red. Okay, and then we're going to end up getting sort of the same result there. So to import this, I'm going to get rid of the module. And then I'm going to change this back to a class of app. But instead of importing the CSS file, I'm going to import app or ./app.scss. Okay, and since I have that Sass library installed, it should be able to read that Sass file. And there again, my CSS works. Okay. But then I can take advantage of all the fancy features you can do with like Sass. Okay, other kind of things you can do with Sass is you can define variables. Okay, so I'll just do an example. Let's see if I remember. It's been a while since I've done this. So if I'm gonna write variables, I just start with like a $sign. So it's like with $sign color red. Where is it? $sign color red. I'm gonna have to look at the docs. It's been a while. Sass. There we go. Variables, there we go. Okay, so what I was doing was fine. Okay, I remembered it right. So red. Okay, so I'm doing it in the module.css. That's why it's complaining. Wrong file. There we go. Okay. Okay, so now what I can do is I can then use that variable over here and be like, hey, this is going to be red. Okay, and I can use Sass variables, and it'll still work. See, it works. Cool. Now let's talk about styled components. Okay, so styled components. So let me comment out the Sass. To use styled components, what it does, it generates components that are pre-styled. That's essentially what styled components does. So I would import styled. If I remember right, let's see here. I think it's import styled from styled components. Okay, let me just double check. Let's take a look at the styled components documentation. Yeah, it's styled. That's what I thought, but I just want to make sure I'm importing it correctly. Import style from styled components. Okay, yeah. So yeah, my memory is not failing me. Okay, and then basically you write a component just like this. You would just say, okay, const heading, or we'll call it like fancy heading, because it's a component, so you got to use capitals, equals, and then you use this style dot, and you put the name of the kind of thing you're making. So I want to say styled h1. And this takes advantage of a feature in JavaScript called template literals. So what you do is you use backticks, and what it does, it takes the string that we're going to put in the backticks and passes it to a function called h1. We don't need to get into the sort of the how. But basically, you can write CSS in here. So I can be like, hey, this h1, I want it to have a background color that is red. I want it to have a border that is 3 pixels, solid purple. I just write all my CSS like normal. And what that does, it creates a component. So now I can get rid of this component and then use this fancy heading component and say hello world. Okay, now when I go to my app, let's refresh. Oh, I have to, is my server not running? Yeah. And PM start. Okay. And see it's working. So you see it's styled, like there's the border on the H1. Okay. And this is nice because basically this makes your code look a little bit cleaner because you're not seeing basically you can have names that can describe the different versions of a button. So I can make like a fancy button, and and all it's doing is providing the styling. Okay. And then you can actually, there's all sorts of other fancy things you can do. So you can actually like inject props. And because you're using, template literals, you can use interpolation to inject values in that way. There's a lot of really cool dynamic stuff you can do this way with your CSS. Okay, one of the newer options is Stitch, which is right over here, Stitches. This is not strictly a React. You can actually use this with any framework. That's the nice thing about Stitches. So let's just try this out. So we're going to install it. So I'm going to stop the server. Okay, let me just type it out manually. npm install @stitches/react. Okay, so that's going to install that. Okay, and let's take a look at an example. Okay. This is new to me as well. Okay, so we're going to import style from Stitches React. And then this is going to be basically how you do it. Okay, so essentially it would look something like this. So I would comment this out because we don't need this code anymore. Okay, and now I'm going to import styled from @stitches React. Okay. Oh yeah, the left this needs to be commented out too. Okay, and then basically we declare a button. Is that going to end up being the same way? And it kind of ends up working the same way. Okay, so essentially, basically, I say const fancy heading equals, and then we're going to say styled, except now instead of doing like styled.h1, I would say, hey, it's an h1 tag, and then the second argument is an object with all my CSS properties written the JavaScript way. So I'd write like background color camel case, because in JavaScript, CSS properties are always camel case. So red, and then I'd be like border 3 pix solid orange, okay, and so forth and so forth. And then once again, I have this component that I can use right there. So this should, let me just run the server, npm start, and then that should work. And the cool thing again, that Stitches is created to work with any framework. So if you're using like Solid, you're using Vue, you can also, there's also versions of Stitches that work there. So it's like just like, instead of having like styled components, it's like purely like a React thing. Okay, and yeah, so there you go. See, it works. So that's one option. A couple other options. Okay, so we're almost through. There's 2 more options I want to make sure we cover. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of this that for now. And I'm going to make it back to an H1 that says hello world. Okay, and the next one to talk about is emotion. So let's look up emotion. Okay, so there's the install, so let me just copy that over. Okay, and essentially the way this is going to work is that you don't create custom components. Instead, what you're doing is you're passing, essentially you're using a function to kind of create a class dynamically, kind of like the CSS modules, but you'll see it's like a little bit different. I have mixed feelings about this one because you end up writing a bunch of CSS in your code, but there's different ways to do it, I guess. Okay, so essentially the way this would work is you would import CSS. Let me just make sure, is it a named export? Yeah, it is a named export. So CSS from at emotion CSS. Okay, and then essentially when you do the class name, so if I want to style the H1, I would just give the H1 a class name, but instead of giving it like a string as a class name, I would use this CSS property and pass it like a template string, and basically do something like this: background color red. Okay, and basically, kind of like I wrote my CSS, I would write my CSS in a CSS file, but I'm like writing it right there. This will work. npm start. Give it a second to load. Saying it works. That's all fun and good, but you can see like that can get really messy if you're writing a lot of CSS that way. Although what I think you can do, so let me just double check, see if I can do this. So I can go like x and say like const h1 class equals, and then do that, and then pass h1 class like that and get the same result. And yeah, that works. So what you can do is you can define all your, you could do all this CSS definition in a separate file, export them as variables, and then just attach them. And again, kind of like you've seen with the others, the benefits of using these sort of like JavaScript-y CSS libraries is it allows you to use a lot of the CSS, like JavaScript features, where you can like dynamically inject variables, create functions to dynamically generate the CSS. You can do a lot more programmatic things because you have the power of like all of JavaScript to help you dynamically like generate your styles. So that's where like the benefits of using these kinds of libraries are. One more, CSS and JS. Okay. And this is what I meant, JSS. Okay, so let's install JSS, but there's a special one for React, so React JSS. Well, I don't need to see a code sandbox, but this is fine enough. Okay, cool. So we can actually just see right here. So basically you would install this library, React JSS, so be npm install React JSS. And essentially if you wanted to use this, basically what would happen is you would do use styles. Okay, so this would basically create all your different styles. Okay. And again, basically think of these as like a class. So this is like one class, and then these are the stylings for that particular class. And then basically what happens is that this creates this useStyles object, or this useStyles function technically. It's it creates a hook. And then you're able to pull in the theme. Let's see where the theme's coming from. Use theme. Okay. Use theme. Is the theme being made somewhere else? I mean, it's a hook, but I'm just not sure if it's like a. Been a while since I've used this one. Files. That's what I'm looking at. No, yeah, I guess that's You use theme. So you're going to generate a theme using use theme, and then classes. You would say useStyles, pass in the theme, and then you generate the classes. Okay. And then basically you then pass that, kind of like we would do with like modules, where basically each class becomes sort of a property of this object, and you just pass that as the value there, and that should work. Okay, so you can see like I can do classes.wrapper because we created the wrapper here. You can create classes.title because we created title over here. So that's another option. This is actually one of the older of the options. That's why it's like maybe seems like a little bit more complicated than the other ones, because it came around a little earlier. It's like I think it was like maybe the first of these kind of like CSS and JS options. But still quite popular, because again, you're working with a JavaScript object, which means you get all the powers of JavaScript object syntax. So anything you can do with a JavaScript object, you can do here, which allows you, again, like you see here, they're using like functions to generate the value of certain properties. So like the color here is actually the result of a function. You can do some sorts of fancy stuff like that. So hopefully this gives you a nice tour of all the different ways you can style in React. My name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Have a great day and enjoy.